It caused me to ask one question that changed my life and changed my leadership forever. And I asked the question, I wrote it down on a yellow notepad in my office that day. What separates average leaders from those that go to the next level? If I can figure out what the great separator is between the average ones and the next level ones, then there's nothing I can't accomplish.
Welcome back to the Next Peak Podcast. I'm your host, Clint Herndon. This is the podcast where we help you redefine success and achieve goals that are actually important to you based on research and real life stories. And today I am joined by someone who's going to fill in some of these real life stories and give us some great leadership principles. I'm joined by Jeff Cochran. Jeff is the author of The Next Level Leader and is a leadership coach and speaker. Jeff, thanks for joining us all the way from Knoxville, Tennessee.
Yeah, man, it's a blast. It's an honor to be on. Thanks for having me.
We're going to have a lot of fun because we're talking about one of my favorite topics, which is leadership. Parker and I talk about it on the podcast a lot. We have guests that come on and talk about it. But what I loved about your book is you kind of compiled all your John Maxwell's and all these other great thought leaders, and you kind of boiled it down into one easy to read book. And I found out this was actually your first book that you had written.
Yeah, man, I try to make it as simple as possible. I'm a simple guy. So if it gets too complex, that gets in the way of us leading well. So I wanted to make it simple so that it could really help anybody who opened it up. If you read the book or a chapter, you're going to feel like you're able to get forward momentum, start moving forward, start getting some progress.
Yeah, and it's very well written. So if you're listening to this, you've got to pick this book up, Next Level Leader. Jeff takes these really, like you say, it's complex leadership topics, boils them down into some really easy to read, easy to digest topics. And what I love, Jeff, is this cover, man. This is fancy. I like the feel of this. How did you come up with this idea?
Well, I wish I could take credit for it, man. I have a good agent and a good team who, one of the first things they said was, we'll let you do what you do best if you let us do what we do best. So other than voting on a couple of designs that hit what I wanted with the cover, they took care of the rest, the feel, and I was as surprised by it as anybody else. So, and that's a good leadership principle in and of itself. Don't get in the way of smart people doing what they do best. And I had to make a commitment at the beginning of the process. When you get those first edits back and there's red pen all over your book, you put in, I think, 70,000 words. And the first edit came back and said, 20,000 of these have to go. They're just not good enough. You can fight it. As an author, you can fight that feedback as a leader in your organization, or you can say, I hired good people, so now I have to trust good people. And so that was a commitment I made early of hey, if they bring me something on a cover or if they bring me something on an edit, I'm going to trust them. And I only have 3 times in the entire process that I can tell the experts, no, I want to go a different direction. So something like a cover, most of those edits, I didn't want that to be one of my 3 times.
Well, and that is a true test to what you're writing about in leadership, right? When somebody redlines your work, I am really impressed with it. So great job. If this is the first one out of the gate, I can't wait to read what's coming up next. So let's give our audience a little bit of background on you. Where did you start? Where did your exposure to good and bad leadership come from? And what was your personal experience in leading people?
Yeah, so I've got kind of an odd background for a guy who's writing a leadership book. Most people wouldn't think that's where you'd start, but I spent 17 years in local church ministry, Clint, really doing a lot of that in youth ministry. So I wasn't the upfront guy that everybody knew. Most of my career, I spent it at churches where if I said where they were, no one would recognize those towns. No one would recognize those cities. But I learned a ton about leadership in those spots. It is one thing to lead staff. It is a totally different thing to lead volunteers who you have no sway over with a paycheck. Okay. You can't really have bad leadership because if you have bad leadership, your people will leave you. Right. So I learned a ton over the years. My first couple of stops of starting youth ministries from scratch and saying, hey, we don't have anybody here. We don't have any volunteers. We don't have any students. These are new churches. So I have to build it through leadership. Loving people, investing in people, and helping them see their own growth. That's going to be what kind of magnetizes people to me. So I learned a lot of good about that and made a ton of mistakes really early on. I was the smart guy that no one wanted to listen to for a lot of years. So fast forward, About 6, 7 years ago, I got the opportunity to work at one of the biggest churches in the country. And that taught me a whole new degree on leadership, but not because I was with some of the best leaders in the country, and I really was. But I got into a top 100 church in the United States at Faith Promise Church. And what really taught me the most were the questions that came from it. Because I remember taking that job and really feeling confident, Clint, that I was the guy for the job until they offered it to me. They offered it to me, I accepted the job, and I bet 30 seconds later, I hung up the phone and the words came out of my mouth out loud in my office in the middle of Southern Alabama. I said, "Oh no, they're about to realize I'm a fraud." That was the thought, because I could interview well, but I thought, I don't know what they think I know. I'm not as smart as they think I am. I'm not as good as they think I am. And in that moment, I came to the realization either I was going to grow into the leader they thought I was, or I was going to be exposed as another person who didn't have it. And a lot of that was insecurity. It was insecurity on my part. It was a lack of belief in myself. But what it did was it caused me to ask one question that changed my life and changed my leadership forever. And I asked the question, I wrote it down on a yellow notepad in my office that day. I said, what separates average leaders from those that go to the next level? If I can figure out what the great separator is between the average ones and the next level ones, then there's nothing I can't accomplish. So that question, I began to call everybody I could across the country who was farther along than me, who led in any sphere. And I asked that question. And a couple of years later, as people were noticing my leadership take off at this new role, I was being offered promotions, being talked about with a lot of future things coming. That's when I realized this is a book and I have to share what I'm learning, because this isn't something I came up with. This is my learnings from asking a good question. And if it can grow me, it can grow anybody.
Yeah, that's awesome. And one of the things you touched on was you were leading volunteers, which I think is really the pivotal point where you prove whether you're a good leader or not, because you don't have positional leadership over them, right? They don't have to show up. They're not dependent on a paycheck. They can just say, thanks for being my leader, but I'm out. This isn't for me. But instead, you had to find ways to instill the vision in them, talk to their hearts, inspire them, and all those types of things. When you got into those positions and you're leading volunteers, especially with this very large church, what did you find were the toughest things to overcome in getting people to come on board and be part of that vision?
Yeah. So a lot of it was overcoming my own insecurity and being able to believe that I belonged where good leaders sat. So I took over a student ministry at our broadcast campus when I first joined that church, and was really leading close to 600 students a week and over 1,000 a month. But the hardest part of that was that I was taking over a group of 200 or so volunteers that had been led by a great leader before me. Okay. So the leader who had led them before me is now the chief of staff at this church. He's an incredible leader, a great vision caster. And I had to overcome my own insecurity of being in his shadow, right? And what I had to realize was I can't cast vision like he could cast vision. I can't lead the same way he led, but I can lead the way Jeff Cochran can lead. And I'm a poor imitation of someone else, but I'm the best version of me because God put me here for a reason. So really trusting that even coming after a good leader, that I had what it took, that was a big step for me. But then after that, I'll never forget. So I asked this question, what separates average leaders from those who go to the next level? And one of the first guys I talked to is a guy named Ricky Ortiz. Okay. He was at New Spring Church in South Carolina at the time, way farther ahead than me, working on the executive team there. And he answered my phone call, which, first of all, as leaders, if you can be accessible, that's huge. But I'll never forget what he told me. He said, Jeff, most leaders lead backwards their entire career. And if you want to be separated from the pack, stop leading backwards. So I asked him, I said, Ricky, what do you mean? What does it mean to lead backwards? And he said, most leaders come into a new spot or they come into a new team. And the first thing they do is decide what they're going to do. They cast a vision to get people on board with it. And then when it fails, they ask questions. If it doesn't fail, they take credit. If it fails, doesn't go well, they ask questions. He said, that's backwards leadership. He said, real leadership, next level leadership requires asking questions and getting to know people first. It means wrestling with, is this the right decision to make? Letting other people in on it and then only deciding after you've brought people in. It was one of the best things I've ever learned about leadership. In the first 6 months on that job, I was very candid with my leaders. I said, hey, I'm not going to make any changes in the first 6 months. This is not, we're not in a bad place. We're not in a dangerous place. So the first 6 months, I met with every volunteer, over 200 people who didn't report directly to me. And I just asked the question, hey, tell me about who you are. Tell me about what gets you up in the morning. And then before we finished, just nothing but getting to know them, believe in them, love on them. I'd ask one, just really easy question. What's one practical thing I can do that would make it easier for you to lead in your role? I mean, they would tell me simple stuff, but I made a commitment to come through on every single one of those things. So I took probably 200 to 400 really small practical steps. And what it did was it allowed the team around me to say, okay, he may not be as good of a vision caster as the guy that came before him. He may not have all the right answers, but he cares about us. He knows that we know what's going on the ground, and he's going to come through when he says he's going to do something. So once I had that trust, it became easy about 8 months down the road for me to make a significant change. One of the most significant changes the ministry had ever been through, because I had gained equity with all the people. If I hadn't taken the time to gain that equity, then it would have been a political back and forth. And a lot of those people had more capital than I did at the time. So one of the greatest things I learned from that I could share with leaders is listen to your people. When I'm consulting and I walk into a new organization, one of the first things I will tell the executive leaders every time is, I'm going to do some focus groups. I'm going to listen. And the reason why I'm going to do that is because your employees, your people already know what the problems are, and odds are they know the solutions, but they probably haven't felt safe enough to let you know. So I'm going to get them in separate rooms. I'm going to make them feel safe. I'm going to compile it. And then we're going to let them make us look really smart, because you have to trust good people. And if you can't trust them, then you have to get new people in. But we have to lead with that trust. We have to lead with building that equity first.
Yeah, and you may have touched on it, but I'm curious, when you meet with leadership teams, organizations, or even in your past experience at the churches, what are some shortcomings that you see commonly in leaders? And what does that look like in symptoms of an organization?
Yeah. One of the biggest symptoms, I've talked about it in my own leadership, it's insecurity. You can't be insecure and lead well. You can't. People can smell it on you. They can sense it. But when the senior leader or a high-level leader in an organization is insecure, people can't call you on it even when they know it, right? So what it does is it makes people feel unsafe. And then you're hiring great people, but they don't feel safe enough to do their job. They don't feel safe enough to tell you the truth. So most organizations that I walk into, I'll see because of someone's insecurity at a high level of leadership, people have stopped telling the truth. And when people stop telling you the truth, you're making high level, sometimes millions of dollar decisions based off of bad data that was given to you. Why? Because not that people wanted to lie, but they're trying to protect themselves and their friends and their coworkers, because it doesn't feel safe to be the one to give the boss bad news. I recently read the book Lights Out, and it was really telling the story of GE, the rise and fall of GE. How did they go from having Jack Welch at the helm in the 90s and being one of the biggest countries in the world, or one of the biggest companies in the world that rivaled countries for their borrowing power, to now they're not even on the Dow Jones Industrial anymore. They're a shell of who they were. And all throughout that book, the author shows time and time again where people gave bad data because they felt unsafe. So I would say time and time again in this kind of post-COVID world we're living in, time and time again, organizations that are needing my help are calling me in. And the biggest thing I'm seeing is their people don't feel safe enough to tell them the truth. If we don't provide a culture of safety where we reward people for bringing red pen to our work, where we reward people for telling us the truth, then eventually they're not going to. And I think Andy Stanley says it, probably going to butcher this quote, but he says, if you surround yourself with people that you don't listen to, then eventually you're going to be surrounded by people who have nothing to say, right? And we can't lead on our own. So if there's only one thing that I could get leaders to do in this season of just life that we find ourselves in, it would be to ask more questions, listen more closely, and trust the people that you've hired to make the right decisions.
I think you've nailed it, Jeff. I think that when we look at leadership today, it's mostly based around this short-term strategy, right? Especially what you read about in the media, because it's so focused on quarterly stock results or profits. And so people will lead iron-fisted out of this insecure place because they're going to carve out their profits so that they can get their bonuses and everything. But what you're talking about is more of a long-term strategy where you're saying, yeah, GE, I think, is a perfect example of this. You can lead a certain way and push people into the ground and get the results for a short term, but over a long span, you're going to start to see the results of that. And I think what you're asking people to do is to step into, hey, let's lead from a place of security and love and from a vision of where we're going, and we're going to get some long-term results out of that. So when you sat down to write this book, I mean, we've basically kind of gone in the order that you had put in the book, which is great. You had broken this into some 3 spheres of next level leadership.
That's right.
You've got inner drive, outward focus, and discipline determination. Kind of give me an overview of those 3 categories or spheres. And then I want to ask you about some specific ones that you had put in.
Sure. Yeah. So I got better language. It's funny because it feels like it was ages ago when I sent this manuscript to editing, right? And I haven't touched it in a long form since. But one of the pieces of language I've adopted since I use with companies that I work with is I talk about the triangle of leadership, and really taking each sphere of leadership that I talk about in the book is actually just the side of the triangle. So at the base of the triangle, and it's important that it's at the base, is inner drive. And that's that ability it's all the leadership traits that come from self-motivation, from passion, from desire. And that has to be at the base of the triangle of leadership, because if you're waiting on someone else to motivate you, you're not going to be able to lead well. Okay. The leader's got to bring their own weather every single day, because other people who work for you and work with you, they're going to need that motivation. So if you're waiting on somebody to motivate you, you really can't lead. So that's where that inner drive comes from, that desire, that mission, that purpose, that passion. Those are all parts of inner drive. So I put that at the base of the triangle because I think it's something you got to have. And then on each side of the triangle, you picture that left side, that's outward focus. It's a focus outside of you. It's a focus on your employees. It's a focus on your customers. It's a focus on the impact you can make in the world. It's not just about a bottom line. It's not about promotions. It's not about how I'm seen. Okay, if you have a very strong inner drive, you don't develop in the side of the triangle of outward focus, you become that narcissistic leader that no one wants to work for, because it's all about you. You're not going to share credit. You're not going to listen to other people. And you're going to be that boss that really just bulldozes people. Okay. And then the right side of the triangle, it is probably the least sexy part of the triangle. Leaders don't like to talk about it, but it's disciplined determination. And it is all about the disciplines we embrace, the hard parts of leadership. And here's the thing, they're not hard because they require you to be wired that way. Okay, a part of outward focus and inner drive is your natural wiring. But when it comes to discipline determination, none of it's natural gifting. None of it is something the leader would say, I can't do that. Every part of discipline determination are simply hard choices that you make and say, you know what? I'm not going to want to do these things, but if I don't do these things that no one wants to do, then I'm not going to get where I want to go. So it's that self-discipline to bring the boundaries that are needed to lead well and to bring that yourself. So I got to bring my own discipline. I got to bring my own hunger and drive. And I have to find a way, if I want to be great, to focus all of that on making an impact on other people. Because selfish leadership, selfish companies, they just don't last long. People want brand loyalty, even to big companies that seem to care about them, listen to them, and make an impact in their daily life.
Yeah, and I think what you just described, the foundation has to be that inner drive, that self-reflection piece. You talked about, when I asked you the question, what's one of the biggest shortcomings you see in leaders? You said insecurity, right? And I loved what you said is that you're not going to be a good version of anyone else, right?
Yep.
And so in your book and on the website, there's a self-assessment that you start leaders with. What's the kind of the basis behind that? And why should somebody start in that area?
Yeah. Well, great leadership starts with self-awareness. Most leaders either think they're vastly better than they are or vastly worse than they are. Okay. And it really depends on how your insecurity manifests. We're all insecure. So does your insecurities leader manifest as false pride? I'm trying to prove to people who I am. Or does your insecurity kind of manifest as an uber humility, which may look good on the outside, but it's not if you don't believe you can do kind of what you can do. So the assessment really just starts with helping you to figure out where are you today. Okay, it's finding that self-awareness to know I can't become the leader I want to be tomorrow unless I first know where I'm at today. And then I kind of make a plan to get there, to cross that gap. So with the book, there's a free self-assessment that people can take. And what it does is it breaks apart all three of those spheres of leadership, all five of the traits, the leadership traits that are in each sphere. And it gives you an idea of where you fall there, what kind of balance you have as a leader. What I love, that's a free assessment that comes with the book. But there's actually a professional 360-degree assessment that I use with organizations and that I have certified coaches that sell for me. I actually got to do one of those this morning with a business leader in the UK. And we got to talk about, okay, here was your self-assessment and here's where it was. And although it wasn't super different, there was a sizable shift with what it looked like after he had two other people take it for him. Someone he led and someone who leads him. Those are the two people who took it for him. So there was no hiding from it because now this is exactly how people are seeing my leadership today. So one of the things he looked at and he said, hey, this one trait, it surprised me. I thought I was better. And I hear this from almost every leader that I assess. I thought I was better at managing conflict than that. Well, if the people who work with you and around you say, no, they struggle with managing conflict, you can't fight that because I'm not coming off to them as who I think I am, right? And managing conflict across the country is probably the number one lowest rated trait we find in leaders. They don't manage conflict well. They let it grow. And everyone around them knows the conflict's there. It's growing. It's like a cancer to our team. So do you not know or do you not care? And because leaders don't want to bother people, they don't want to be the jerk, we let that conflict settle and simmer for longer than it should. But I really think that the assessment, what it does more than anything, is it gives us just a clear picture of, Clint, where are you at today? Where am I at today? And until I come to grips with that, I stop fighting it. I stop arguing with it. I stop trying to believe that I'm the person and the leader that I already wish I was. And I say, who am I today? Where do I want to be? That's the only way that I can build a bridge between those two. So I wrote this book, and I have to tell people I coach all the time. I wrote this book. I developed this process, but it all came from great questions from great leaders. I have watched myself level up from the developing leader to the next level leader. I've escaped average, but I'm trying to step into that elite level of leadership. And as much as I wish I could tell your listeners I'm that elite top 10% leader, by my own assessment, it tells me, nope, you're one trait short. And Jeff, you've been one trait short for 3 years. Because the stronger you get, the farther you go into this, the longer it takes to develop some of those areas that are a little weaker. So I'm still developing just like anybody else. And it helps me as a coach to be able to come in and say, I'm not the expert that has it all together. I've been through the same process as you. And I know that this assessment can be painful. But when you know where you stand, that's usually one of the only things that's keeping you and that is in your way from becoming the leader you want to be is I don't know where I stand and I don't know how to get there. So let's find out where you stand. Let's put together a plan. And then it's just a matter of taking one step after another until you get there.
Yeah, it's interesting. You brought up the managing conflict piece. That is a huge missing tool in a lot of leaders' tool belts. And because it's tough, right? If you think about even managing conflict within your house, if your kids are upset with each other, or they're upset with you, it's not a fun conversation to sit down and have. But I also like the distinction you made in the book about tension versus conflict, because when we say managing conflict, we want to make sure, and again, I think you pointed it out in our conversation here, is that you don't want to shut people down because you don't want to make them afraid to voice their opinion. You don't want them afraid to say, I don't quite like the way this is being delivered. Here's another suggestion. But you want to get to the point where you're not having people fighting. Can you kind of give us a distinction between the tension and conflict?
Yeah. Well, a lot of leaders stay away from conflict because they don't know the difference between tension and conflict. So they stay away from all of it. They see conflict everywhere and think, if I let my team fight, if I let my team really cause sparks between one another, then I'm going to lose people, right? And I actually think it's the opposite. If you're hiring really high capacity leaders on your team, And that's the goal. I want to hire other leaders in my organization. I want to hire people who are smarter than me, who are better than me, and help them come along. But if you hire high capacity people and you never let them kind of rub shoulders in a rough way with people, you never let them test those ideas, they're going to find another place to go. Right. And I think Steve Jobs was so good at this, because if you ever read anything about the way Steve Jobs led, he would bring conflict to the table, yet he wouldn't let it grow. Right. Like if you read anything about him, he caused conflict. Literally almost everywhere he went, somebody give him an idea, and his natural response was something along the lines of, "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard." And it didn't mean shut down your idea. It meant, if it's good, prove it to me. Bring me along, right? Yet Apple wasn't a place where you had people politically trying to jump over each other at that point. It was a place where the best idea could win. So we like to think sometimes of tension and conflict as the same thing. And if I have any conflict, it's bad. Well, actually, we just want healthy conflict. And healthy conflict is what I call tension. So if you think about some of the biggest bridges in the world, they don't keep us safe. We can't run across them without tension. Okay. Some of the most important parts of our life are kept in health by tension, where two opposing sides are pulling, and in the middle, something beautiful is created, right? Well, if we try to resolve a tension, okay, we try to resolve a tension instead of manage it, then we're actually going to cut off some of the best parts of our organization. So what it looks like to deal with tension, yet at the same time, manage conflict, is to manage it and not resolve it. Okay, I want to manage that tension, not resolve it. And attention is something good. Okay, attention is, there's two good sides of this, and probably what's best is in the middle. Okay, and you can ask some questions, like if there's an argument going on in your team meeting, ask yourself the question: is the organization getting better, or is this team going to be bitter when we're done? If they're going to be bitter, it's conflict you need to address. If you're going to get better and someone may just slightly have their ego bruised, that's tension, right? We manage that. We manage that ego bruise. You got to ask, are we searching for what's best? Okay, is this argument of searching for what's best, or someone trying to assert their dominance and put themselves over someone else? If they're trying to assert their dominance, it's conflict because it's selfish. But if they're literally searching for what is best, that argument's okay. So I really like to challenge leaders and encourage them, let your best people argue to find the best in the tension. The tension's in the middle, but we have to manage that tension instead of resolving it. What we do when we manage that tension is the leader has to say, okay, we've heard a lot. We've heard from both of you. This has gotten a little heated in this meeting today, but here's what we're going to do. When we leave, we're all on the same page. We found a better solution because we pushed, because we pressed. So as we leave, whether you agreed or not, we're all on the same page. We're pursuing this with everything that we have because we got here as a team. So this conflict does not leave the room. It's done. That's managing conflict, managing the tension. Conflict, though, often, if it's negative conflict, it happens more outside of those meetings, outside of those rooms. It happens in back channel communications. And I'm a big fan of leaders putting into practice a no gossip policy. Okay, kind of a 3 strike. 3 strikes, you are out of this organization with gossip. And gossip is simply this: anytime I talk to someone else and complain to someone else in the organization about a problem they can't solve. Okay, if I'm complaining to my team because we can solve it together, it's not gossip. If I'm complaining to another peer who can't actually solve the problem, instead of talking to my boss about it or talking to the person I have the issue with, then I'm gossiping. So those things together can allow us to find the healthy tension and manage that within meetings while squashing conflict everywhere else.
I think that's a really healthy approach, because what you're doing is building unity towards a vision without making people fall in line and forget who they are as individuals. But you're giving them that safe environment or that safe arena to kind of duke it out and not worry that it's going to carry over outside of that arena.
That's right.
So yeah, hugely important in an organization. I worked in a large telecommunications company, and we did not have that. We did not have, number one, we didn't have the forum to be able to voice our opinions, but we also didn't have a control on the outside gossip, as you were describing. So there's a lot of bickering about, well, so-and-so is doing this and so-and-so is doing that, but nobody was actually trying to solve the issue. So I want to go back to one of the points you made in Inner Drive in your book. You talked about hunger and how, as a leader, that's like the primary thing you have to have. But I want to talk about both sides of that, because you actually point that out in your book, that it can also be extremely dangerous. Why does a leader have to have it? Why is it good? And then what is the danger in that hunger or that drive?
Yeah. Well, if you don't have a leadership hunger, again, as soon as it gets difficult or you hit a season where it's hard to be motivated, you're going to stop. You're going to mail it in. You're only going to give partial effort. Like, a leader has to have that hunger, because no one else can put that drive inside of you, right? No one else can make you want to. I can't push the want to button with people, okay? So I can teach a lot of things, but if I'm hiring someone with a high level of want to, okay? Someone who doesn't need me to be around them. And I think that's vital for any leader. The downside, the shadow side of that, is there's nothing wrong with hunger. There's something wrong with hunger if it's too high without a balance of the other traits and outward focus, okay? And here's what I mean. If you hire a hungry leader who has a 4 out of 5 drive score in the inner drive section, so in that inner drive base of the triangle, they may have 4 out of 5 traits that are strengths. If they don't also have a couple of strengths in the outward focus where they're good at dealing with people, that is easily going to become the leader who is a bulldozer who runs over everybody in their path. That's the leader that, hey, we just got to get stuff done. We got to push forward. And if you get in my way, I'll destroy you over it, right? And honestly, I write about it, and I write pretty harsh about it, only to come back and say, I know that's the case because that's the leader I was in my 20s, right? And it's some of the biggest mistakes I made in my 30s were moments where I reverted back to that, okay? And it was never stopping, always moving, always trying to take the next hill. And I remember talking to an organizational psychologist when I was about 32 years old. And man, she was singing my praises. So she has all the data on organizational leadership. My boss is in the room listening to this conversation, right, over Zoom. And she says, Jeff, you are a special, once in a generation type leader. There's nothing you can't do. You can fill any role in this organization. You're going to be successful at whatever you do. And if there's a place where they need leadership, you can fit it, right? I'm listening to this and I'm like, this lady, I just need to hire her like a few $100s an hour to follow me around and tell people who I am. This is great. Until she got to the but. And the but has haunted me for years since. She said, but let me tell you what will hold you back. She said, no matter what happens, you will reach the top of the mountain. She said, but if you get to the top of the mountain and you look behind you and no one's with you, did you really lead? Did you really make an impact? And she said, Jeff, if you're not careful, you're going to get to the top. You're going to look behind you, and all the way down the mountain, you're going to see nothing but broken and bruised bodies of people that you stepped over to get to the mountaintop. And she said, so if you really want to be great, you've got to learn to slow down enough to bring people with you all the way to the top. And to me, that's what healthy hunger versus out of balance hunger looks like, okay? And out of balance hunger is you get to the top of the mountain, you accomplish it, yet nobody wants you on the team even after you won. Nobody wants you to be there because you were selfish. You were the jerk. You stepped over people. You cost other people their job, right? I would rather get to the top slower, bring other people with me and say, you know what, we could not have done it without them, than to be the leader who gets there because, hey, if you get to the top alone, you're not a leader, you're a producer, okay? And production doesn't equal leadership. At the end of the day, if all you got is production, then when you're gone or you take a promotion, then that ceases. If you're a leader, when you leave, the organization should get better because of what you did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. And leaders cannot grow in a silo. I think that it's important when we talk about how can people get better. We Parker and I talk a lot about books we read or things like that. And people could read those and get encouraged and try to digest this stuff, and even reading your book. But trying to do it outside of another group of people can be very difficult. What's something that you're doing or your organization's doing to not just go in, speak at these events and go, yay, raw, become a good leader, and then go away and there's no actual leadership change?
Yeah, we walk with them. We walk with them. So here's what the traditional consulting firm is going to do, Clint. You've seen these people, you've experienced it. Really good and smart people. But consultants are known for, let's come in, let's inspire you, let's show you what's wrong, let's show you how it could be better. We tell you exactly what you need to do, and then we're gone. And 3 months later, you're going, okay, that made that seem easier than it actually is. We don't know how to do this. Okay. And then busyness and day-to-day life and actually meeting the bottom line happens, and they quit. And it's okay, we paid $100,000 or we paid tens of thousands of dollars and we did nothing with that. That's the joke about consultants. You bring them in, you pay the money, nothing changes, okay? Both with myself and my own organization, and then Ministry Architects, which is another firm I work with just for churches, okay? So I work with the business side. I work alongside of them with the church side. And what we do at really both firms is we come in, we help you to see where your leadership could be. We help you to see the pitfalls and the potential. And then we put together a practical plan, okay? So when I come into an organization, what I love to do, I actually did 360 assessments earlier this week for a team, okay? This is like a 4-person team. They raved about it so much that the senior leader called me back and said, I want to take my entire team through this, okay? Now I want to take the entire organization through it. So we come in, we take everybody's assessment, we help show them where they're at, and every employee gets a development plan that is practical, step by step. This is what I'm working on. It's how I'm working on it, that they agree upon and their supervisor agrees upon it. Okay. But not only do we get them started there, we let them know every 3 months, we're going to review it. Every 3 months, we're going to take the assessment again, and you're going to be able to see where you've grown, where you stayed stuck. Okay. In the meantime, we coach those supervisors on how to coach their people. We coach them on how to get the best out of them. And when they get stuck and they say, this development plan is just not working in this piece, I don't know how to speak their language, we help them speak that language, even if the coach has to come into the room with them, right? And we set a 12 to 18 month plan. So with this organization, we're going to walk through it with you. You can try to do it on your own, but we would rather walk through it with you. And if you don't succeed, so I'm actually working on something now that I'm going to release in probably September. It's called the Leadership Accelerator. And that's where we come in, we do all this stuff, all the leadership assessments and coaching with an organization as a whole. But here's the guarantee. If at the end of 12 or 18 months, whatever you contracted us for, if you haven't seen at least 75% of your leaders grow with significant growth that we can see from the assessments and the data, then we'll refund you 50% of your money back, which means I'm barely paying the bills at that point, right? But it's because we like to tell them, hey, our reputation is your progress. Our reputation is your results. So by coming in and getting our hands dirty, I think that's the difference. I think it's the same thing with leaders. Don't just tell your employees how they could develop or how you developed. Get your hands dirty with them, okay? Help them when they get stuck. And then the data is going to speak for itself, especially with our assessments of it's the people who work with you who said it. It's not us. It's the people who work with you every day who saw the change.
And that's why I wanted to have you on the show, because I love the authentic change that you guys are inspiring. It's not just, hey, I put out a leadership book, you guys go digest it, become a great leader. You're actually giving them tangible steps to improve and then giving them feedback in that process. You and I could probably sit and talk about this topic for like the next 3 hours. So, but in the interest of time, I'm going to cut us off. If people want to get a hold of you, what's the best way to find you?
Yeah. Just visit jeffcochran.online. That's COCHRAN. jeffcochran.online. You can get coaching there. You'll be able to join growth circles. You can get one of those leadership accelerators, or you can just connect with me on social media. You can check out the book. It's all there. It's kind of a one-stop place to connect with me. And man, I would love to connect with your listeners. One of my favorite parts about coaching and consulting is getting to have those conversations with people where I say, hey, like I left one this week and I gave a person my email address. I said, if you get stuck, email me. And you could just see their jaw open. And I said, it's not every day that the author of the book you're reading says, email me, but I really want you to email me because I want to help you hit your full potential. That's awesome.
So parting question I'll throw at you. What are your top 3 books and why should everybody read them?
Oh gosh, top 3 books. That's hard. I read so many. I'm kind of a prisoner to the moment a lot of times. But I would say The Go-Giver is one of the best books that you could ever read because it shifts. If you struggle with outward focus, it is going to help you think differently than you've ever thought. Multipliers by Liz Wiseman. If you lead people, you have to read Multipliers, and learning the difference between an accidental diminisher and a multiplier. That one changed my life perhaps more than anything else. And The third book I'm going to give you is actually a faith book. It's a Christian leadership book, but I would encourage people to read it who are listening, even if you're not a Christian or share my faith. But it's Sun Stands Still by Stephen Furtick. And what it did in me when I read this probably a decade ago, it's one of his first books, it made me believe bigger and see the importance of faith and belief, not only in people, but in where you can go. Because if the leader doesn't believe big, no one's going to believe big.
Love it. Well, thanks, Jeff, for coming on, man. I really appreciate your time. I'm so glad we connected. We've been planning this for like 2 or 3 months. I can't remember when we started talking about it. You had something come up. I had something come up. We finally got it on a date when we could actually do it. So thanks again for your time. Any parting shots before we call it good?
No, man. Thank you so much for having me on. And just keep doing what you're doing. Your listeners don't know how blessed they are. This is great content. And I know it encourages me every single time you drop an episode.
Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate it. Hey, guys, if you liked what you heard here on the Next Peak podcast, we'd love if you subscribe, share it with your friends, and leave us a review. We're also exploring some new topics. So you know how to get a hold of us. We've got a website, nextpeakpodcast.com. You can send information through there. We'd love to hear what you would love to learn about, and I will get some guests on to talk about it. That's what we do here. So get a hold of us there. And until next week, keep climbing your next peak.